We begin with this Mueller mystery. The hearing, of course, has long been scheduled for next Wednesday, but Politico early today reported that this had been tentatively pushed back at least a week, lawmakers negotiating, as discussed, for more time. Then a spokesman for the Judiciary Committee says, quote, at this moment, so for this moment or more, the hearing is still currently, in their view, scheduled for next week, the 17th. It's also listed formally under the congressional website as July 17th. You see right there, Judiciary Chair Nadler and other Democrats aren't really talking.
Is the Mueller hearing going to be delayed, sir?
I'm not saying anything about it.
I'm looking forward to the Mueller hearing when he comes in.
We need Mueller to come in and testify, and that's what we're focused on trying to finalize.
Is the hearing still on for Wednesday, Mr. Chairman?
Not commenting or anything.
At a basic level, there's some gap there between the website I just showed you, which has the hearing on, and these chairs now today ducking those questions. Kind of a weird Friday as we're waiting for what everyone agrees, whatever your views of the Mueller report, everyone agrees is a huge blockbuster hearing. So you have the plan for Mueller to testify in public no matter what the date. And then you have another Mueller hearing, and this is what we've covered on this show. You may have heard less about it because there's been a lot going on. I'm telling you, this is super important to the resolution of the issues in the Mueller report, because it appears to have been canceled in response to direct pressure from Trump Attorney General Bill Barr. We learned just this week that the DOJ was trying to pressure two of Mueller's top deputies out of talking to lawmakers, even in private, even in closed session. Today, the Washington Post reports that very closed-door session is canceled. Democrats say Mueller's team may have backed out, quote, under pressure from the Trump administration's Bill Barr. New York Times had also reported the pressure would have a, quote, chilling effect on those Mueller deputies. Well, that appears to have happened today. And we have some idea how powerful that chilling effect could be. Bill Barr is, of course, currently investigating Mueller's investigators. He also dialed up the pressure in public when he said that surveillance, which was lawful and approved by a court, constituted, quote, spying. And he remains the most powerful law enforcement officer in the country. So if he goes and tells people not to testify, whether they're in or out of government, you can imagine the kind of pressure that puts on someone when Mr. Barr has deliberately kept open investigations into those very investigators. I want to get right to it with some of our experts. Former federal prosecutor John Flannery was special counsel to 3 congressional investigations. Matt Miller, a former chief spokesman at the Justice Department under Eric Holder, and Natasha Bertrand, Politico's national security correspondent. I'm going to go down the line like this. Natasha, you've been reporting this out. What's the very latest? What is this really about?
Yeah, Ari, we don't really know what's going on, to be totally honest with you, and the members don't really seem to know what's going on either. We've heard that members have been told by their staff that the deputies' closed-door testimony before lawmakers has been postponed or canceled. It's not really clear, but they haven't confirmed definitively that it's not happening. We're just hearing that perhaps the rumor is that it's put off for now. So we don't really know what's happening with that closed door. And as for Mueller testifying, that's still up in the air too, because as you mentioned, a Judiciary Committee spokesman said earlier today that they still have it on the books for the 17th. So what this really seems to be about is Democrats are upset, perhaps, that they don't have enough time to question the special counsel, for everyone to question the special counsel. And obviously the pushback on that is, well, you know, this isn't really about you. This is about getting in the best questions possible in a limited amount of time. Also, Mueller, you know, doesn't necessarily have the stamina anymore to sit through what, you know, a marathon hearing. And so being as efficient as possible.
I don't know if you've seen his medical records. I don't think we know that.
It's been, in certain
I don't think we know that.
It's been questioned.
In terms of evidence and what we've seen, he ran a very aggressive 2-year investigation on a tight timeline. He is known to be careful in his testimony, but in terms of sticking to the evidence, Matt, we have a lot of signs that there was an agreement for testimony, and we have public reporting, which really the DOJ hasn't denied in any formal way, that Mr. Barr took this unusual step of telling people not to even testify in closed session. I mean, the Intelligence Committee, that's literally their bread and butter. Does that look suspicious to you, Matt?
Yeah, it does. Look, the department can't actually block a former employee from coming up and testifying, but they can try to intimidate them. And they've tried to do it before. They tried to do it with Sally Yates. What they can do is tell former attorneys that, look, you are not authorized to talk about confidential information here. We believe some of this information is confidential, even though there was a 448-page report. There are certain privileges that are at stake here.
Sure.
You're not authorized. These privileges haven't been waived. And what that does is it's an intimidation factor, because it sort of leaves open the possibility that the Justice Department might try to refer one of these attorneys for charges by their local bar association. It's probably not something that they would do, but if you're one of these attorneys, it's not a fight you want to have. And it's the implicit threat that early in the administration, the Justice Department made against Sally Yates when she was getting ready to testify. She blew right through that warning. She ignored it. And I would hope that these employees do it too. It's really important that they get up there and answer questions from this committee.
Do you think there is enough evidence to show, Matt, that Mr. Barr may be misusing these open investigations, or is it too hard to say at this point?
I don't know if it's the open investigations or it's this implicit threat of some kind of sanction via a bar referral, which I know was very much a live issue. And when the Sally Yates discussions were going about, back and forth about whether she would testify, it could be one or the other. It could be both. But look, Barr ought to get out of the way of this. He said publicly that he had no objection to Mueller testifying. If he has no objection to Mueller testifying, there's no reason that Mueller's deputies ought not to be able to go and testify too. And I think it's important because there are two things that congressional investigations do. One is fact-finding, two is public illumination. The Mueller hearing, the public hearing, is for public illumination. The closed session is for fact-finding, so they can find out what other areas these committees ought to be looking at. It's really essential that it go forward.
Yeah, and John, one of the great hidden biases in all media is not ideological. It's temporal.
Right.
It's about time.
Yes.
If Mr. Barr pulled this move the first week after Mueller finished his investigation, my media hypothetical, based on my experiences, it would be wall to wall. It would be a huge deal. Bill Barr comes out, and right after this is starting to tell these people they can't talk, muzzling, silencing them.
Right.
The months have gone by. Mr. Barr has played this out in public in all sorts of ways. And now, although we're treating it seriously, and we covered it earlier this week, I would submit it doesn't necessarily get the same attention, and that's the whole point. And so take a listen, John, to the president today doing the public version of this, which is as Barr muzzles people behind the scenes, the president tries to tell his folks, well, this is all a redo and a do-over, and it shouldn't happen, and we're so sick of it, when in fact, none of these people have even testified once yet. Take a look.
Right.
Well, I think how many bites at the apple do you get? So now they have Mueller go make a speech. That goes. Now they want to have him again. They want to go it again and again and again. There's nothing he can say. He's written a report. The report said no collusion, and it said effectively no obstruction.
John?
Well, instead of bites at the apple, what they want to do is starve us of information, except for their misleading remarks. And Barr, who's supposed to be our law enforcement agent, is in fact a lawbreaker, and he transparently does it for Trump all the time. But the most disappointing thing, I think, in this entire game that they're playing, this obstruction, is that we have a former Marine who ran an investigation for 22 months, a large part of which we credit as obstruction, and now he's part of the obstruction. And as for Semper Fi, we thought he was going to be faithful to the law and to his charge, and that by this time he'd be telling us why he did what he did, and instead he runs and hides. He wants to give us only an hour, or maybe 2. They made fun of Hillary Clinton, whom they questioned for 11 hours, and he can't come up to the Hill next Wednesday and testify until it's over and tell us what he did and why he did it and what his relationship was with the people in justice who apparently cut off his investigation, and now they're strangling him.
I said something that was Mueller defensive in terms of the evidence earlier. I'm now going to say something that's Barr defensive, which is we don't have public confirmation that they cut off the probe.
Well, look at it is a fair inference that they did. And the reason it's a fair inference is
your inference, but explain.
Edge.
Yes, sir.
No, well, I'm sorry. I don't mean you can correct me, of course, but They stop at the water's edge of Trump and the family and the fortune at a time when they've asked to continue the investigation for 6 months, when they've investigated Stone, when they've indicted him, when they've searched his house, and when Cohen comes forward with all the information about a connection with WikiLeaks, and then they close down the investigation. And in the report that Trump writes, that Mueller writes, then it's quite a slip, that Mueller writes, he says in the second part, we didn't have a thorough FBI investigation of the conspiracy that we are calling collusion. These things are enormous, and it seems to me that while Nixon never got away with his cover-up, they're doing a really good job, and the Democrats are trusting them. My grandmother believed that wrestling was honest, and it seems that no matter how many times these people shortchange the Judiciary Committee, they go in again. We're going to do a take-home exam. Donaldson is going to answer 200 questions, and she doesn't answer them, and they're filled out by lawyers.
Let me bring Natasha's reporting back into this. And Natasha, I'm not going to ask your grandmother's position on the WWF. That's something that guests either bring up on their own or not. But it's a personal call. But it's why we love Flannery. I can tell you there's a lot of evidence that wrestling is not on the up and up, professional wrestling. But Natasha, for folks watching who say, okay, is this about the calendar and Mueller's just going to testify later? Fine. Or is this about something more? What are your sources telling you? Because we are hearing from the Hill, and I think the footage we showed at the top of the broadcast shows this, that it does look out of the ordinary.
On the other hand, we've been told not to really read too much into it. I mean, we've been told that this could just be, members do want more time to question Mueller, but at the same time, maybe the 17th isn't a feasible date for them to do that. So it could literally just be a scheduling
but why?
thing.
I mean, then that's what the question is. This is not like the beginning. This has been weeks of negotiation. They landed on a deal. They announced it publicly. It had a time frame. And it had 2 subpoenas attached. So the notion that on the Friday before, as Bill Barr steps in, that now there's this chaos does seem a little, to use a legal term, a little.
You're totally right. And I wish we had more answers right now, but we're really not getting anything from either committee at this point.
Matt?
Look, I think at the end of the day, Mueller needs to show up and testify. He needs to take questions from every member of these committees. As you point out, he's there under subpoena. He's not there as a voluntary witness. And witnesses who come up and testify under subpoena don't get to dictate to the committee how they're going to conduct their questioning. The rules of the House say that every every time the committee has a hearing, every member gets to ask 5 minutes of questioning. And there's no one who has more respect for Bob Mueller than me, but there shouldn't be special treatment for the special counsel. He ought to show up and take questions from every member of the committee the same way that every other witness before this committee does. He ought to do it for Judiciary, and he ought to do it for Intelligence, too.
And you're echoing, I think, what Mr. Flannery was alluding to earlier, and that he could make it harder. He has the leverage of saying, well, I'll fight this subpoena, or I'll ask Bill Barr to help me fight it, although that would be odd. And that's why they came to some accommodation. But as you say, if the idea is no one's above the law, that includes the president, includes the Attorney General. It also includes the highly respected special counsel. It does or doesn't operate that way. I think this is a fascinating mystery with Mr. Barr somewhere in the picture based on the reporting we have. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.